Russia's Ministry of Defense has released a statement revealing the murky activities of the United States military. The ministry says that Washington's Office of Pandemic Preparedness and Response Policy searches for virus mutations to then use them to further its own interests.
As in 2019, the United States began preparing for a new pandemic by searching for virus mutations. We do not exclude the use by the United States of these so-called defensive technologies for offensive purposes, as well as for the purpose of global management by creating crisis situations of a biological nature.
According to the ministry, Washington has been amassing various pathogens from its direct involvement with various biolabs around the world, which they say are for research and preventative measures, but Russia's defense ministry is not buying that. And they point out that whenever the Pentagon, for example, is interested in any pathogens, be it COVID-19 or avian influenza or the African swine flu, they later somehow end up becoming pandemic. And who stands to benefit from this? As we've seen time and time again, it's American pharmaceutical companies. And they point out, their findings point out that, for example, that there is a possible collusion between Big Pharma and U.S. aid via an intermediary company called EcoHealth Alliance. Now, they have been studying the diversity of bat population since 2015, and they've also been looking at mechanisms how to transfer coronavirus strains from bats to humans. And we know that just 2 months before the world ever heard about COVID-19, there was an exercise conducted at the Johns Hopkins University in New York, where in that exercise entailed scientists transferring an unknown at the time strain of coronavirus from bats to humans via a pig. So, of course, all this and the office that is now being opened leads them to question why this is happening. And of course, they also point out that the U.S. government, for example, in May this year said that there's no longer a public health emergency when it comes to COVID. Joe Biden himself last September said that the COVID pandemic is over. Yet this July, they are opening this Office of Pandemic Preparedness and Response Policy, which is led by a man who's a military combat surgeon and retired Air Force Major General. Why? In addition to this, documents that have been uncovered during Russia's special military operation in Ukraine point to the fact that there is a center called the U.S. Army Medical Research Institute of Infectious Diseases actually plays a crucial role in all this, and they're the ones who are collecting all these dangerous pathogens from around the world in these biolabs, including one in Ukraine.
The U.S. Army Medical Research Institute for Infectious Diseases has been involved in U.S. biological programs in Ukraine. Thus, representatives of the institute actively led projects codenamed UP1 and UP8. As part of these projects, the possibility of using arthropods to spread Rickettsia, tick-borne encephalitis virus, as well as causative agents of Crimean Congo hemorrhagic fever and auto-hunter viruses was studied.
That's why Russia's defense ministry believes that Washington is preparing to establish biological control, sort of using defensive technologies for offensive purposes to create biological crisis conditions and situations. And also there's added concern about the people involved in all this. For example, Dr. Anthony Fauci, America's leading doctor, who was the head of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. He has reportedly made a lot of money from this pandemic. And he's also the one who was adamant that when it comes to COVID-19, it came about naturally.
We have labs in Ukraine because we're developing bioweapons. So they transferred the authority for biosecurity to one agency in the HHS called the National Institute for Infectious and Allergic Diseases, run by Anthony Fauci. So Anthony Fauci got all the responsibility for bioweapons development. He got at that time a 68% raise from the Pentagon. 300 scientists wrote President Obama and said, you've got to shut down Anthony Fauci because he's going to create a microbe that will cause a global pandemic. And so Obama signed a moratorium that shut down the 18 worst of Anthony Fauci's experiments. And instead of obeying that law, Anthony Fauci shifted a lot of his operations offshore. And those operations ended up, most of them in the Wuhan lab, which is a military lab, and that the Chinese run, the People's Liberation Army. And then a lot of them went to the Ukraine.
There will be those, of course, who will say that these are just all conspiracy theories or Russian propaganda, but we are talking about specific examples, specific organizations, and let's not forget that Washington has itself admitted that it does have biolabs, including in Ukraine. And again, let's not forget just how terrified they were at one point in case their research there falls into the wrong hands, and how catastrophic that may be if it falls into Russian hands. So what that research there was all about, perhaps this is what we're talking about.